Did she actually end up circling back to the meadow without noticing? No, that was impossible. She shivered at the abnormal chill in the air and peered around at the strangely indigo-shaded forest around her in confusion. This wasn't the same place. She didn't know how, but she knew that wherever she was now was definitely not her usual forest hangout. Everything was surrounded by incredibly thick pale blue fog, much to the point she could barely see the very top of the trees in the dark forest. Not even the moon could be discerned in the fogged-up sky. Everything around her was still strangely visible without the moon or anything else lighting it up naturally. So, where was she? The threat of her pursuers were gone at this point, but she still held her tongue from calling out and making herself known. She couldn't explain it, or maybe she could try, but she felt like eyes were boring into her at all sides, and her primal instincts seemed to become keener, and she felt the growing urge to run as fast as she could to return to where she truly belonged. But before she could even move from her spot and begin to sprint, the ground beneath her began to quake violently, and she staggered where she stood, barely capable of keeping her footing. She fell harshly onto her back as the ground continued to rumble with greater force, and just as she had expected, the ground around her started to crumble and crack in the middle of the meadow. She watched in horror as the cracks began to split and open up, and she stayed stunned in shock as her eyes met with a large, inky black pit devoid of any and all light. After suddenly jerking herself out of her stupor, she crawled away from the pit and breathed a sigh of relief once the whole world had stopped its violent quaking. She pushed herself up and started to stare into the dark pit. This was like the ravine back in her normal reality, but formed in the middle of the meadow and not deeper into the south side of the forest she lived by. She knew she should have left the area at that point after the ravine had formed, but she just felt the sudden urge to she didn't know, look into it? So she began to cautiously edge closer and closer to the edge as the abyssal black pit gapped wider and wider with each step she took. And as she did so, the fog within her mind started to become thicker and thicker. Without her knowing, that thick fog would soon end up hazing out any and all coherent thought that could possibly spare her from mindlessly stepping off the edge and succumbing to her dark and lonely misfortune. However, a loud cry in her head broke through the fog, and clarity seemed to leap back to the forefront once again. She staggered back away from the very edge she was one step away from reaching, and turned around on impulse to then be met with the sight of little Zarina again. She wasn't completely in the meadow, once again, still standing behind the tree line and seeming to wait. But Tristan found the strange split of the forest she previously had her back to shimmering in a bizarre ripple effect, and also not being shaded in that cold blue color like the rest of the area. She could see hues of warm brown, green, and also orange, but slightly faded out to where she really could have missed it like she did. And if she listened closely, she could have swore she heard voices in that general area, but her attention instead went on to Zarina, who still had stepped foot beyond the tree line. Tristan was just about to call for the small creature, not even thinking about getting out of there herself and going towards the animal and the presumed safe zone. Really, she thought calling for her would persuade her to step past the tree line. Why on earth was she staying there? Silly thing, there was no way the game could be played if she stayed hiding. But her voice died the instant she felt some vice-like grip clasping around her leg. She looked down, and her eyes widened in terror when she realized a large beast-like black hand with large white claws had taken up most of her leg. That was almost looking to phase in and out of view like she was a ghost. But the only thought in her brain was like this was something out of a pure nightmare. Upon the grab, Zarina instantly burst out of the shimmering undergrowth and over the tree line, bounding straight towards the stiffened and unmoving Tristan. Her mouth gaped open on what should have been a loud cry, but no such sound had come out. But a sharp, keening ring shot through her ears, and a resounding headache erupted into her head, and Tristan quickly embraced her head in an attempt to alleviate the pain before it could become an agony she couldn't handle. But she felt her foot suddenly get yanked behind her, and she instantly surged forward and slammed face first into the ground. Tristan quickly looked up, seeing Zarina still racing towards her, and she reached out her faded, pale, bloody hand towards the one true being she considered her friend, or at least someone who cared to show up for her, and then she was tugged back into the black pit forcibly. And the last thing she saw, before she was plunged into instant abyssal blackness, was the blank, foggy, lightless void of the sky. And she knew that would truly be the last time that she remembered the star-scattered sky of nighttime where her true home really was.